transition and making sure Zinc had a really good home within ServiceMax. But having been part of the birth of ServiceMax as well as Zinc, like I almost felt like it was like two of my children that I really wanted to see be successful. And so I agreed to stay on at ServiceMax and take on a bigger role beyond just running Zinc. And I had done the CMO role prior, and it was marketing is kind of in my blood. So it was obvious that I would do the marketing role, but I also didn't really want to, I had been a CEO and had a lot to offer and had learned a lot, and I wanted to contribute a lot more across the company beyond just marketing. And so had a lot of good conversations with Neil, our CEO, about where could the company see the biggest impact. And it was kind of what do you want to do? And my answer was, well, what do we think we need? And that's how customer experience got added into my role. So in addition to running the marketing function, I run a cross-functional team that looks at what is the customer's experience with ServiceMax from the first time they interact with us in a marketing campaign on our website, all the way through the sales cycle, through implementation, through go live, through time of renewal, through marketing events for customers, and support experiences, et cetera. So I know none of this is foreign to you guys. Dish is highly, highly focused on customer experience as well. But ServiceMax had never really had one central place. It was like these sort of disjointed, you talk to marketing, then you talk to sales, then you talk to support, and like never a continuum. So that's something that I've spent a lot of time and a lot of energy on in addition to marketing. So kind of a long answer to what am I doing now, but I think explains a little bit more about my role at ServiceMax. And Dish being a customer of Zinc, and you guys are actually looking at ServiceMax for some of the new wireless functions. So you guys hopefully get to benefit from the renewed focus on customer experience.
Thank you for that background and additional explanation. It's really helpful to get that additional context for your career journey. And throughout your career, you've really been a vocal advocate for equality in the workplace. What inspired you to speak out so openly about workplace equality, and has that impacted your career in any way?
Yeah, it's a great question. Definitely a thought-provoking one. Sort of a self-reflective question. And I did kind of have to think about, why this is certainly my passion. And Lee, you and I talked about this before. I mean, there's a lot going on in the world right now. And in this current moment, I think the Black Lives Matter movement has really, it's gained such amazing, incredible momentum. And I've kind of, in the last few weeks, started to shift my focus a little bit. And it's not away from women and empowerment. It's more toward, hey, this is a point in time where real change has a chance. And so let's spend the time to focus on it to maximize it. Certainly women are a big part of that too. But throughout my life, I have focused on this women empowerment initiative. When I think back to when and why, it's kind of interesting. I don't know that I really came around to this until later in my career. I think I was naive to some of the issues and problems. And I think part of it is I grew up in, I'm 51 years old. So I'm like probably older than a lot of you. And I grew up at a time when there weren't articles being written. There were a few movements here and there, and certainly we had the right to vote, and some of those things had happened, but there wasn't this movement that I think has happened in the last 5 to 10 years. And when I entered the workforce, I just sort of assumed this is how it is, and there are certain things I can do, and there are certain things that I can't be considered for. But I always had this notion of wanting to prove that I could do whatever I wanted to do. I played soccer in college, and when I got out, and I had a degree in English, and when I was finishing up college, I said, what do you do that combines sports and English and writing? And I thought, well, I want to be a sportscaster. And that was kind of my career goal coming out of college, was to be a sportscaster. at the time in 1991, there was one female sportscaster. And I know like some of you who are younger, maybe you were little kids in 1991, you don't remember that because they're like, I mean, I don't know, it's probably close to equal now. There's so many women in that field, but there literally weren't any. And I remember being super frustrated and being like, I mean, I played sports all my life. I can talk about sports and I can write. And there's a lot of women's sports out there. Like, why is a man more eligible or more qualified to do that job? In fact, I played college sports. Like, how many of those sportscasters out there that are male actually played a college sport? So I remember, I don't know if I would call it a chip on my shoulder, but I definitely had this desire to prove something and to prove that I am just as talented, just as smart, and just as capable of doing something that traditionally men have only done. And in some ways, I can bring something new and different to the equation. So, and I think we can all agree now, like if anybody watches ESPN or sports, like it's really interesting, like women have different perspectives, just like people of different races have different, we all bring our experiences differently to the table, and it just makes for more interesting discussion. I think the same was true for me with the CEO role. I mean, I think you look around, there are very few women in CEO roles. And it was the same thing where I just sit there and I'm just sort of puzzled by like, why is that? Like, why is it that a man is automatically more qualified to be a CEO? Why are there more men in these CEO positions? And I have a lot of theories on why that is. I mean, certainly people talk about the pipeline problem. There aren't that many women. And, you know, some of that I don't agree with. I think there are a lot of reasons, but and we can talk about those, but going back to your original question, I think I wanted to prove that I had the qualifications to do whatever I wanted to do. And, you know, I look at the US presidency, and we still have never had a female as a US president. And I just wonder, like, how is a man more qualified for that? You know, there's more women in this country than there are men. Isn't the president supposed to represent the entire republic? Like, why is a man more qualified to represent? If anything, we should have like we should have a female and a male and a black and a Hispanic. Like, why not have, you know, all of these different experiences represented? But I think that's, as I got older and as I started to conquer some of those things that I wanted to set out to prove that I could do, then I started wanting to figure out, okay, why systemically has this happened, and what can we do as women and as leaders to try to change it so that women, you know, the women behind us don't have to work so hard to prove it. They just are automatically considered for those types of roles.
Thank you so much, Stacey. Yeah, I really like what you said about real, oh my goodness, my lights just shut off. Real change has a chance right now. And I think it is easy to, as women, stand up for the rights of women. But right now is really the time where we can look at inequality as a whole and come together and try to correct that. So what can we do for future generations so they don't have to go up against the same things that current generations are facing? I really like those points. You spent a lot of your career in male-dominated industries, like you mentioned. I mean, it was what you set out to do in sports broadcasting, and then even still in enterprise software, that's pretty male-dominated, as well as field service. As a woman, can you share more of your experience working primarily with men in these fields? Was there ever a feeling that you were surrounded by a boys' club?
Yeah, and I know boys' club is a topic we're tackling a little bit today. And I have some mixed feelings on the topic. I mentioned I played a lot of sports growing up. I was a bit of a tomboy, although I also had lots of female friends, and I liked to play with dolls, and like I sort of had both sides of me. But I definitely played tackle football with my brother and his friends growing up, and for the most part, I feel like I I was able to fit in with groups of girls and groups of boys. And so I, as a younger child, just sort of thought, well, yeah, there's a boys club, but it's not that hard to be in it. Like, boys and even men interact differently. Like I always joke that if you watch how men, a man walks into a room and the first thing he says to another man is like, where did you get that shirt? Come on. That is like, they're always giving each other a hard time. A female walks and two female, it's like, your shirt, that I love the flowers. It's so like women compliment each other. Men like to give each other a hard time. If you can give somebody a hard time, like you can fit in better to the boys club. Like there's just silly things like that are just learning how to interact without having to really change who you are. But I will say, when I was in college, in the summertime, I would coach I was a goalkeeper, and I had gone to this like elite goalkeeping camp as a high schooler. And when I got to college, and there were no female instructors, and kind of back to my same story, I was like, this is ridiculous. Like half of this camp is girls. Why are there no girl instructors? And I remember I went to the guy that owned the camp and was like, hey, I really want to work at this camp in the summers during college. And he was like, great, we definitely need girls. And so I got on the camp. And the way the camp worked is that you went to a different city every week, and they were held at colleges, and the kids would come for a week and they would stay in the dorm. So it was like a sleepaway camp. And, all the counselors would be there. It was mostly college athletes. And I remember it was me and there was one other girl, and it was the first year they had ever had girls on the staff. And I was like, this is great. Like I literally didn't think anything of it. I was like, whatever, I hang out with guys all the time. This will be fun. Like I like guys, this, it'll be fun. And I remember getting there and just like the director, not the owner, but the guy that kind of ran the day-to-day camp and set up the staffing. I was like, wow, he does not want me and her here. And we all have had that feeling probably, maybe not everyone, but it was just obvious. And he just treated us differently. He gave us, like, his sort of punishment was that we had to teach the youngest kids. So, and the younger kids are just harder. It's more babysitting than it is like real skills coaching. And I remember just being irritated by it. And my response to stuff like that was not to just like shut up and go along. I was usually more like ready to take it on and prove myself more than anything. But I'll never forget, at night, all the counselors used to go into like one of the dorm rooms of the counselors, and they'd get beer and hang out. And it was not like a big party, but it was like a hangout, and people would tell jokes, and it was kind of like, hang out with the staff. And it was like the second night, and this guy, the director, who was all of our bosses, starts telling the most crass, like off-color, totally discriminatory toward women jokes. And it was two of us. And this, like, I still get chills thinking about it. And all these men, it was the most uncomfortable, awful experience. Like I was horrified. And most of the other guys like my age were also horrified and like didn't know if they should laugh. And it was just so obviously inappropriate and targeted at us, and nobody else was doing it. And I remember just thinking to myself, like, A, I just want to cry. And B, I don't want to be here anymore. Like, I want to leave tomorrow. Like, I cannot work in this. This is just so awful. And again, I was like 20, maybe 20 years old, never had that. And it was the first time I really felt like, okay, this is a club that he doesn't want me in. And whether or not everybody, of course, afterwards, half the people were like, oh my God, we're so sorry. That was awful for us too, men too. But it was the first time that I was like, okay, this isn't just about, okay, I have to learn how to give you a hard time and get along with you. This was real discrimination made to make me want to leave and be uncomfortable. And I remember being up all night. The other poor girl was like traumatized. And I remember like counseling her through it. Anyway, it's a long story, but it was the first time I realized, like, again, this isn't just something that, oh, can't we all just learn how to get along better with men? Like, there are definitely still examples when there is a boys club and you're not wanted in that boys club. And what I ended up doing was I talked to my mom and I talked to my dad, and we basically came to the conclusion that like we couldn't let this guy win. Like, it just wasn't fair, and it wasn't fair to all of these kids going to this camp to not have girl coaches. And I went to the owner and I complained, and I don't know if he did anything or not, but what I did was I just focused on being the greatest counselor that I could be to these little, like, I had the littlest kids. And I remember on the last day of camp, like, so many of the parents coming up to me and saying, you know, oh my gosh, our kids, boys too, had the greatest year they've had. Like, you really helped them so much. And we're writing letters, and I ended up finishing out the summer for whatever. I mean, I don't know what it was that made him stop. I don't know if it was the owner. I don't know if it was the support that we had from the other team, but he never did it again. I literally never talked to him again. But it was after that that I was like, this is not just our problem. We have to stand up against this. And sometimes it is a matter of like, hey, you know, figure out how to get along and interact in the ways people do. But sometimes you really have to take a really strong stand against the boys club and say, no, like, this isn't right. And the reason this isn't right is because ultimately it doesn't produce the best result. I believe that diversity delivers the best result. And whether it's a camp counselor, whether it's our government, whether it's leadership, the more diverse views, the more diverse opinions and experiences, the better the company can be. The better the soccer camp is, the better the company is. And so we should push for it not to just be the boys club, because it's better for all of the constituents of that organization. So that, you know, kind of answering both of your questions about the boys club and also why I'm so inspired to do this is because at the end of the day, I think we have, you know, like I said, women are more than half of society. We should be better represented in the leadership across all of the organizations.
Completely agree. And I also want to point out boys clubs can look different to different people. It doesn't necessarily have to be a gender breakdown. It can be race, it can be socioeconomic class, it can be a lot of things, but it's whenever you are feeling excluded from a group that is treating you as if you're inferior. Yeah. That's a boys club in this situation. And for all the men on here, we appreciate you coming to listen. You are probably not one of those boys, just so you know. All right. You mentioned early in that response that there is a certain breakdown of how to interact with different genders or in different situations, and that can be really important in assimilating into these kinds of hierarchies and cultures. A common gender bias that can be exacerbated in male-dominated industries, companies, situations is the likability bias. For those of you that aren't aware of that, that's where we expect men to be strong and assertive and women to be kind and cooperative and kind of gentler. So when women are assertive, they're often perceived as less likable and considered abrasive or aggressive. Can you speak to your experience, Stacey, on this likability bias experience and how we as men and women both can help overcome that bias that might exist?
Yeah, that's a tricky one. And certainly one, I mean, I myself like to be liked. And my advice is not like, oh, don't worry about that. Go be assertive and aggressive. And if people don't like you, it doesn't matter. Cause that's not my own approach. In fact, I think, being liked by others is often a great way to be successful, and being kind and being cooperative are absolutely fantastic qualities in business. And I think, although I try not to get in trouble for generalizing, I do think that women tend to be more empathetic. And generally, we can probably all agree they tend to have more of those traits. I think for me on this one, strong and kind should not be mutually exclusive. Assertive and cooperative should not be mutually exclusive. And that's where I think we need to go. And that whether you're a male or a female, you can be strong and you can be assertive and at the same time be kind, be thoughtful of the impact on others, be thoughtful of how people in the room are perceiving you, and whether you're bringing them along with you or whether you're just mandating and bossing them around. One of Sheryl Sandberg's favorite words, bossy. I guess that's my approach on it. It's funny because just last night we have a Zinc group for our leadership team. And I don't know if all of you guys use Zinc. I know the field team there uses it, but it's basically like, it's a kind of a chat app where you can have groups, but we have a team and it's 8 people and it's all the executive leadership. And we actually have 2 versions of it. One is like the serious group and then one is the fun group. And last night our head of HR posted this little survey and it was like, what Toy Story character are you? Which was a weird thing to do. But anyway, we all took it and it was hilarious. And mine came up. In fact, I'll read it to you because it was hilarious. It came up that I am Forky. And it says, you're sweet and caring. You can find it hard to adapt to new places, but you're incredibly thoughtful and loyal. And like everybody had a good, hilarious laugh about that one because it so does not describe me. Like my boss was like, sweet ? And I'm like, hey, I take offense to that. Like I can be sweet. But I guess my point here is that I think most people would consider me strong and assertive and verging on demonstrative in the workplace. But I also think that I would like to believe that people also view me as a kind and caring person who wants to be collaborative and seeks input. And I think, again, I guess my big point here is, what if we can do both, and I mean men and women, then we're all better off, right? And I think the world has started to turn on the men and some women. It's less common for women, but the world has started to turn on the men that are just strong and assertive without being kind and collaborative. And I'm happy to see that. And I think as we force more of our male leaders to be kind and cooperative, and you guys have some great examples of them at Dish. So I'm certainly not talking about the Dish leadership team. I mean, from Eric to Rob to John to like all the guys that I have interacted with are absolutely both strong, assertive, and also kind and caring. So consider yourselves lucky, but it hasn't always been true with male leadership. And so I think the more we can talk about those qualities for men, and then women will feel less like they have to tone down both the kind and caring and the strong and assertive. And we can all just learn to be all of those qualities at the same time.
Absolutely. I think balance is really key in everything. And I love what you said about being strong and kind, and they're not mutually exclusive in any way. Even though sometimes we can think they are, there's no reason you cannot demonstrate both at the same exact time.
Yeah.
And Stacey, you're absolutely correct. Both John and Rob are members of the DWN Executive Steering Committee, and they have been from very early on. So they certainly exemplify a lot of those qualities and a lot of that balance, and are very supportive allies. So we're appreciative towards them. I'm glad you get to work with them.
Mm-hmm. Me too.
Kind of switching gears here, but have you ever felt suppressed in your career because of an existing boys club? And if so, how were you able to overcome that and become successful as you are? Did you disrupt that club and kind of point it out, or did you just assimilate? How did you handle that?
Yeah, I mean, I gave one example of soccer camp. I mean, I guess you could call that the early stages of my career. And then after college, I went to work at Oracle. In fact, the story goes that I was going to go to broadcast journalism school to become a sportscaster, but I needed a job to pay the bills, and I was living in San Francisco, and so I got a job as an administrative assistant at Oracle. I was actually an administrative assistant to an administrative assistant. So like I did her faxing and her mailing, and it was about as frontline of a job as you can be at Oracle. And then I just got there and I was like, wow, this was in the early 90s and it was growing and thriving. And there were so many opportunities. And I was like, wow, like if that person can be doing this, and I have those skills too. So I basically just I spent 6 years there working my way up. And actually Oracle was a fairly progressive place. It was later in my career that I went to a startup, and just again, I feel like I was naive a lot of times in my career where I just kind of don't expect it. And then I'm in it and I'm like, wait, how did I get into this situation? But I joined as the head of marketing, and there was an existing leadership team. There was only one other woman on the team, and she was like a director of HR. And there was another VP female that had been hired on the same day as I was. And they would have these like leadership meetings every 2 weeks, and she and I weren't invited to them. And I remember just being like, this is just so odd. Like, is it because we're new? Is it, and then the director of HR, which I know she should not have done this, but I remember she pulled us aside and she was like, I know I shouldn't tell you guys this, but like for women, I have to do it. She's like, your salaries and your stock are significantly different from everybody else on the team. And it just sort of solidified for me that like, this was not about us coming on at the same time. This was about us just not being included. And there was no one above me in marketing. Like I was the head of marketing. I reported to the CEO. It was just ridiculous. And I mean, my approach to it was that I just buckled up against it over and over. I just pushed him. And I really liked the company. And for the most part, I liked him. It was like a blind spot that he had. And I pushed and I performed in my job, and I just was relentless, and I didn't give up. And I constantly questioned, like, why am I not in that meeting? I sought input from other people that were invited in the meeting. I became really close friends and allies with the VP of sales, who was a very powerful person in the company. And he started advocating for both of us. And eventually we got invited in. I remember finally going to the meeting and being like, this is what I fought for. Like, this is such a waste of a time meeting. It's like everyone just going through agenda items. So at the end of the day, but I fought really hard. Now, so my advice in scenarios like that is like, don't give up the fight. And if buckling up against the manager isn't working and you're starting to irritate, obviously that's not going to help, but finding allies really does help. And I think ultimately what changed it was the rest of the guys on the team going to our boss and saying, we need to talk about marketing. We need to talk about professional services. That was the woman. And in these meetings, like we have blind spots on this area of our business because these women aren't being included. Like, we need them there? Like, we want them there. And I think that's what helped change it. So I would say, push for what you think is right, and try to, do it in ways that aren't going to alienate you. Look for allies. If ultimately you don't think that this is the kind of organization that is going to change and be more inclusive and diverse, I would leave. And I know that's not a luxury for everyone. And certainly, there are plenty of people that are, really can't just up and leave. But I would say start looking, just sometimes you're just not going to change what has been the way it's been. And so you should just take your talents elsewhere and make a big impact in a diverse and inclusive culture.
Thank you for your openness there. And I think you made some really great points about those on the call that might be thinking, oh, that experience sounds familiar, to look for allies, to stand up for what's right. And then if it really comes down to it and you don't see a likelihood of change, consider other options if you've put in the fight and it's just not getting the return you need.
Yeah.
As a leader yourself, Stacey, how do you help identify any perceived club of any kind in your ranks? And how can we as individuals and leaders prevent or change a culture rooted in bias like those clubs that we've been discussing?
Yeah, it's a really interesting one. And I think it's been very thought-provoking for us at ServiceMax, especially in the last 2 weeks. I would consider us a pretty diverse company. We have multiple women on the leadership team. We have people of all races on the leadership team and throughout the company. But as Black Lives Matter has come so strongly in the last 2 weeks, we have looked at like, wow, are we really as diverse as we think we are? And maybe we're really diverse as it relates to gender, but like we don't have a single Black manager in the company. Now, our leadership team, we have an Asian, 3 Indians, 2 women, and 2 white men. And we're like, oh, we're so diverse and inclusive. We have no Blacks in our entire company in a manager position. And it's been self-reflective for us. So if we talk about diversity and inclusiveness, it's been interesting because the first thing that we have done in these last couple weeks is go to the Blacks in our organization and talk to them and hear from them. How are you? First, it started with like checking in on them. It's been such a emotionally charged time, but then like the more talking we've done to them, the more we've learned that maybe we haven't been as welcome to them as we could be. And again, I don't think we've been like discriminatory, but we haven't really valued that diversity. And so we're looking at like, how can we change that? What can we do? And I think this is the same for any company with any diversity inclusiveness, right? Look at especially right now, when a lot of companies are still doing a lot of stuff over Zoom, it becomes even more obvious, like who are the ones most often presenting the strategy or presenting on the call. If it's mostly men, like, why is that? It shouldn't, now that we've made this concerted effort, there are a few people in our team that were like, oh my God, this person is amazing. Like, why haven't they risen the ranks? And again, I don't think anyone has discriminated against, but I don't think we actively sought out that diversity and that area of diversity of opinions and experiences. So I guess my advice would be it's not just like, whose pictures are on the leadership team page on the website. It's throughout the organization. Who's coming up with the strategy? Who's presenting the ideas? Who is being encouraged to pursue leadership positions? Are you offering, and my guess is you guys are probably pretty good at this. We certainly can be better at it as a smaller tech company, but like, do you have learning and development career paths that you can offer people so that if maybe they're not the assertive type to go after it themselves, but if you get them into this kind of a path, they'll really shine. So I think it's disseminating that ideology through the ranks of like really believing and embodying that diversity of opinions and experiences is valuable. And I found myself in a little bit of a debate with someone about affirmative action. And basically this was a cousin, and I always have really great debates with her. I consider her intelligent and kind and all of those things. We just happen to be on different sides of policy. But she believes that a Black person and a white person with the same qualifications, if the Black person gets the job, then that's discrimination and racism towards the white person. Now, my belief is it depends. If the company is all Black people and they hired the Black person, then maybe you're right. But if the company is all white people and the company believes that diversity brings about better results, then I'd argue that the Black person's more experienced for the job. And so, again, I maybe get into touchy territory when I'm starting to talk about policy and politics, and certainly my opinions are my own. But I think just the more people do believe that diversity of opinions and experience can bring about better results, the more we'll get out of boys clubs or whatever club it is. I did an exit interview with someone who was leaving ServiceMax a couple weeks ago. She wasn't on my team. So we like to do them where you interview someone that's not on your team. And she had only been to ServiceMax for a year and was already leaving. And so I was really curious to talk to her. And she said, I find that all of the old timers have this club, and it was really hard to be welcomed. And certainly COVID didn't help because we're not in the office. So it's just Zoom calls. And I was like, wow, there's another form of discrimination. Like all the old, don't we want new ideas from new people that look at things in a new way and say, hey, you've been doing it this way for 7 years, but how about doing it this way? And if we're alienating those people because all the old timers hang out in their little clique and they're not welcoming, then that's an old timers, club. And we should try to do away with that. So I think it really transcends gender, and it just always, for me, comes back to diversity of thoughts and ideas is always better.
Completely agree. I think you made some really good points about what we can do as individuals as well. If you are in those Zoom calls that Stacey mentioned, you're noticing that certain voices aren't speaking up or aren't being heard, it's fairly easy to toss a question over that person. What do you think about this, XYZ person, just to bring them into the conversation to start. And as leaders, Stacey, you made a lot of great points about things we can do. And I think one of the most important things you pointed out is just this self-reflection and thinking about who you're spending your time with, who you're prioritizing for different tasks or strategies, and making sure that is speaking to diverse voices, to your point, and making sure we're hearing different opinions. It's really key. So you recently authored an article in Fast Company, Stacey, titled, "Will COVID-19 Allow More Women to Become Leaders?" Your article discussed how these new virtual office environments will hopefully lead to more flexibility and increased time flexibility. Do you think impact to flexibility will automatically disrupt these clubs, mentalities? And if so, how can we mobilize that into long-term change for women and all other discriminated groups?
Well, automatically is a strong word. I would love to think that could be true, but this goes back to way in the beginning when we were talking about why do I do what I do, and part of it comes back to trying to figure out why aren't there more women in leadership positions? And one of my theories is that a lot of it has to do with the messages that we're given as women and men, and how that shapes what we think we want to be in our lives. And I mentioned this in the article, but when I'm speaking publicly and I can see everybody, which I can't right now, and it's hard, but I can see the three of you. So I'll often ask a question, how many in the audience have kids? And, a lot of people usually raise their hands. And then I say, how many of you how many of you were asked if you're going back to work after the kid is born? And all the men's hands come down and all the women's hands stay up. And And I think that really just touches again on the messages. The messages that we as women get from a very young age is that at some point in life, if we are going to have kids, we have to make a choice. And we have to decide if we're going back to work after the baby is born. And what the message that is inherent in that question is you have to make a decision. Are you going to juggle, or are you going to be a good mom? Now, I have the utmost respect for women that don't go back to work, don't work in the home. There's plenty to do to raise kids and create a home. Men too. So this is not about like everybody should work and also like you're not good if you don't go back to work. It's not about that. It's about the fact that we're kind of ingrained to believe that we can't really do both. And I think men also get the same messages, which are after that kid comes, man, we may, because we're progressive, we may give you a couple of weeks paternity leave, but then you're expected to be back in the office full time. Like you're not leaving early. You're not sharing at home. You're the man. It's changing. And it's changed a lot in even the last 5 to 10 years. I have an 11-year-old, and I think it's changed a lot even since she was born. I also have a 7-year-old, and I love seeing it. There's more men that stay home. But I think that if we could just somehow help women and men to understand that there isn't a choice, that you can do both. You can have a great career, and you can also be a very present parent and a good parent and a good mom and a good dad. What COVID has done, I think, is COVID, and you guys are all back in the office, and I'm really jealous, by the way. I'm very sick of this like 3 feet area that I'm sitting in. But what the point I made in the article is, we probably all remember that BBC reporter, and the kid comes running in behind, and the nanny comes, and like everyone's laughing so hard and everyone's so horrified. I'm like, oh my God, that would be so awful if a kid ran in while, I'm trying to be on a Zoom call. And what COVID did is, I think COVID threw all that out the window. Like actually my dog right now is whining outside the door. He wants to come in. Now, I'm not going to do it, but like I would think nothing of just being like, oh, I got to get my dog. Maybe I might even put my dog on my lap and introduce my dog to you guys. Oh, my 7-year-old might pop in, and most of the time, and she pretty much pops in here like multiple times a day. And every time she does, I bring her on, and everyone says, hi, Leah. And she says hi, and they say, oh, she looks like you. And then she leaves, right? And my boss does it too. Like he starts all of our leadership meetings with his 2 kids, like his kids and my kids now like say hi to each other because they see each other on Zoom. Something about COVID and the fact that we were all thrown at home, and we all had to deal with the fact that the kids are not in school, they are home, and we're all still working, and we're all trying to manage. And whether you're a man or a woman, your kids are at home and they're being homeschooled, and we're all just like, it wasn't like, oh my gosh, how horrifying, the kid ran in the room. It became a normal, common thing. And it made us all kind of in that same boat. Now, I will caveat, I do also know that it put a lot of strain. There were a lot of situations where women were carrying a lot of the brunt of, oh, no, you do the homeschooling and you try to keep your job. I'm lucky I'm not in that scenario, but I recognize that did happen. There's certainly plenty of men that were in that same boat too. But what I think it did is it put us all kind of square into the struggle of, I called it in the article, the struggle of the juggle, the struggle of juggling the kid and the homeschooling and the Zoom call and the dog whining, and like we're all in it together and nobody cares. And if I said 1 second, in fact, I'll do it if you want, because he's really cute. But like if I got up and here, I'll do it. Let's see if he's still here. He's right here. Yes, come here.
Yes. I'm very pro dogs on Zoom. Aw.
Hi. That's Steph Curry, the dog. But But, you know, again, like who would have ever done this on a call with hundreds of people where like, oh, sorry, my dog is just whining and whining and whining and waiting for me. And now it's just normal. Like we're all juggling. Everybody gets a pass on this. And I hope that, oh, I think he's been around a skunk. Oh my gosh. Go away. Everybody is dealing with this. Like now I got to figure out how to get a skunk smell off my dog. And I have like 3 more calls right after that. Right. And my kids, one's on a play date, you know, we're all doing it. And what I hope is that it just brings that juggling that we all have to do to the forefront, and it makes it okay. And if I got to leave at 3:30 because I'm going to coach my daughter's soccer team, I get a pass, just like I get a pass because I got to go deal with my skunk dog right now. And you know, it's, to me, it's hopefully a silver lining. I was telling Lee and Kathy earlier, The Economist just put an article out yesterday and I tweeted it. If you want to go to my Twitter, it's at Stacey Epstein. It's probably the last thing I tweeted. Oh no, I tweeted about the Supreme Court decision yesterday. But before that, I tweeted about the Economist article that basically said, as a result of COVID, the workday is going to be shorter. That everybody got used to by 4 or 5 o'clock, you're done with your calls. You're not necessarily in the office catching up and chatting, and the workday is going to just end earlier. Now, maybe we've now gotten used to being with our families at 4 and 5 o'clock, and we all value and appreciate that more. More people are going to be just permanently working from home, and like nobody's sitting around chatting at 5 or 6 p.m. We're done. Like I definitely not. The minute my last Zoom call is done, I am not sitting here like, oh, who can I call to chat with at work? I'm going and talking to my family. So I do think some of the benefits of COVID are just putting us all in that same struggle and letting us all see that we're all dealing with the same thing. If we can all ease up on each other and make room for leaving at 3:30 to coach your kids, or to go watch their game, or to deal with your skunk dog. And then I think these messages of you can't do both will hopefully go away, because everybody will just be juggling both. And we'll have more women working and aspiring to big jobs and leadership positions because they don't think they have to choose. We'll have more men being present at home and helping with the skunk dog and helping with the homeschooling and coaching and going to games. And it'll just be a lot more of equality across the board.
Here's hoping that it continues.
Yeah.
I completely agree. I do think it is creating a lot of authenticity too in our leaders, which is wonderful, that we all have this shared experience and that we all can see more peeks into each other's real lives, creating more basis for connection, which is wonderful as well. Small silver lining and a big dark cloud. Kathy mentioned that she has a question from someone viewing the live stream. So Kathy, why don't you jump in and ask that, since we only have a few minutes left.
Sure, thanks, Lee. This question comes from Gustavo. He did say, what #1 item that the Boys Club can do to minimize any of the disruption needed?
Well, that's a great question. I really appreciate that. And I love that we have men on this call. So thank you for coming. I think this is something for all. We all benefit from the diversity. So we should all join in. I think being aware of it, I think, you know, again, I go back to my soccer camp experience and then my experience of not being on the leadership team. And I think ultimately the real impact was made, or the change was made, the disruption was made because of the allies, because of how obviously uncomfortable the rest of the camp counselors were in the room when those awful jokes were being made. And they weren't exactly like joking around at my, laughing at the jokes. It was like uncomfortable, like, should we laugh or not? You know, whether they spoke up for me to him, I don't know, but someone probably did. I think obviously in my job example, the VP of sales finally said, I need her viewpoints in the room. And, you know, was that ultimately what did it? I don't know, but it absolutely must have helped. So I think more than anything, it's just being an ally and being conscious and looking around and saying, wow, we asked all of these 5 men and we never asked a woman, or we asked all of these 5 white people and we never asked anyone of color. And just like trying to, like, that's what we're doing at ServiceMax, is just trying to make sure we don't have blind spots, and we don't just say, oh, look how diverse and inclusive we are because we have women and Indians on our leadership team, right? Like that's not fully diverse. So it's really a great question. I feel like probably the people that are asking questions like that are not the ones that need to change, because you're probably doing it already. But I would say promote, more dialogue, more just noticing it and trying to speak up for that belief in diversity.
Thank you so much, Stacey. That's a great response, and definitely easier said than done, especially if you are in a culture that's very non-supportive to that. And at Dish Women's Network, we're here to support our allies as much as the women members. So if you ever are in a situation, don't know how to handle it, and you are looking for advice, you can always email us. We will give our best advice on how to handle any of those kinds of situations and how to proceed if you feel like there is that culture in your team or in your personal life. So we are always here. Reach out to us.
I'll add something too. We talk a lot about mentorship and, finding a great mentor. I encourage women to not only seek out other women as their mentors, and I encourage men to not be afraid to mentor women. And that was my biggest worry about the whole Me Too movement, is that men were going to be afraid to mentor women because they were going to be afraid to like get in trouble or have it be misconstrued. And some of my greatest mentors have been men, and in some ways they understand the system a little bit better. They're closer to it. And when it comes to navigating it, they might even have better advice. So it's certainly, obviously, we need great female role models and great female mentors. But and again, I know you mentioned John and Rob are very active with your women's network, and it's great. We have a question from a man. I mean, it's great to see the inclusivity in the women's network, but I think it's important because it's not there. There are gains we can make by interacting with all of us.
Absolutely, and that's a core part of our mission that we'll keep striving towards, is that inclusivity. We partner very closely with the other resource groups too. It really is an all of us issue. So again, thank you to the men for joining. I know this topic probably wasn't the easiest one to go, yep, I'm gonna listen, but it really does make a big difference. And to Stacey's point, mentoring is a huge, huge way that you can help promote more diversity in the workplace, especially with women and with people of color that might not know how the systems work because they've been excluded from them. So definitely something to sit on. I'll also mention, to be a mentor, you don't have to be some bigwig. You don't have to be a VP or whatever. You can mentor at any level at any time. So it's open for everybody to do. All right, on that note, we are up against the hour, but Stacey, thank you so much for your time. I'm already receiving messages about how much people loved you and your topics and your poise, and really got a lot from this interview. I know I certainly did as well. Thank you for sharing your experience and for being vulnerable and open with us. And to everyone viewing, thank you again for joining us today.
Thank you, guys, and thank you for your awesome, thriving women's network. We have one at ServiceMax, and I've learned a lot from Rob and from what you guys are doing, and I keep sharing it with our women's network. So thank you for being such a role model company in that area.
Trying our best. Thank you again. Thank you everyone for joining. Have a good rest of your day. Bye.